Welcome in, everybody, to episode 25 of Black and Gold Weekly. The Bruins season has come to an end, but I brought in special guest Danny Jaillet once again to do kind of a season recap for the Bruins. And last week we talked a lot with Avi about the playoffs, what went wrong in the playoffs, and what was the downfall of the Bruins, and then what they need to fix moving forward. And now with Danny here this week, I kind of want to take a look at the season as a whole, this team throughout the entire year, postseason and regular season, and then look ahead to where does this team need to improve, what needs to be better, what is it going to take for this Bruins team to take that next step from being a playoff team to being a legitimate Stanley Cup contender and not just losing in the second round every year. So pretty fun show here. Obviously, always great to have Danny on. Danny, man, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This is like your fifth time on the show, but it's always great to have you on. You're going to become the co-host pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pumped to be here. I love doing this, and this is one of the best hockey shows out there, so I'm happy to be on.
Hey, awesome, man. It's great to have you as always. We're going to get into a lot here today, but before we start, I do want to thank Mark Allred and the entire team at Black and Gold Productions for their support. This show is in partnership with Black and Gold Productions and would not be happening without them. So a big thank you to Mark and everyone there for everything that they do, and for giving this show an opportunity to exist, and for all the support that they give this show as well. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. And also, as always, guys, the link's down in the description. This is very important. Boston Bruins gear is the top link. NHL gear, any team you want, is the second link. And NCAA college gear, whichever school you want to support, is the third link. If you are in the market for any of those things, any apparel from any of those, there's a huge selection and tons of stuff to choose from. Using those links down in the description, it really helps out B&G a lot if you check out through there and take a look using those links. There's hats, shirts, sweatshirts, long sleeves, short sleeves, pants, all sorts of accessories, travel mugs, cups, there's lawn chairs, there's all kinds of stuff available, guys. So if you want anything that's Bruins related, anything that's NHL related, anything that's college related, you want to rep a school, please take a look at the wide selection down there using those links in the description of the video. It really does help out a lot and makes a big difference. So thank you so much for that. And with that out of the way, it is time to get into it here. Danny, I guess to start, we're just going to ask a broad general question, just your overall thoughts on the Bruins this season in 2021, how the year went, how the year ended, what you thought of this team, just overall synopsis of the year.
Well, for starters, I feel like this team overachieved. I wasn't even sure prior to the season if this team was going to make the playoffs. Yes, they have the veterans, but they also lost pieces like Zdeno Chara and Torrey Krug, so I wasn't sure if that was going to be a major issue. As it turned out, I don't think it was as big an issue as I originally anticipated, but their veteran leadership would have been nice, particularly defensively. The first, I'd say, couple months of the season, I'd say into March, were definitely surpassed my expectations. I thought they got off to a really hot start after the tough opening series against the Devils in January, and then February and March, they kind of started to show some cracks and began to we began to kind of see some issues, and then they kind of trudged their way through March, and something needed to happen at the trade deadline in order for the Bruins to really make a playoff push. That happened with, Taylor Hall and Curtis Lazar and Mike Riley, and then we began to see this Bruins team kind of get new life again, and they were able to put together a solid enough run to get to the playoffs, and then I think we'll probably get into the playoffs a little bit more here. But overall, I thought this team surpassed my expectations, but as usual, I kind of fell in love with this team, and then they broke my heart when it mattered most. So.
Yeah, that's been a common occurrence. Another second round loss here. This is the third time in the last 4 years that the Bruins have lost in the second round of the playoffs.
Ouch.
Obviously, 2019 being the exception. And to me, that was even worse because they ended up losing in Game 7 of the finals and losing a series that I don't think they ever should have lost. And that's a whole other story. But
Yeah.
um, it seems like with the Bruins, it's just the kind of the same thing every year. They have issues with their roster. They have holes, but they're good enough to still clearly be a playoff team, which they were again this year. But then they get to the playoffs, and if they don't play absolutely perfect in the postseason, or if somebody goes down with an injury like we saw with Carlo this year, or just something goes wrong in the playoffs, that is it. As soon as something goes wrong in the playoffs, this team's done. And we saw that again this year. And it's why I try not to get my hopes up because it happens every year. I get my hopes up. I love a team. I get really into a team, and then they go to the postseason and they just don't have enough to be that true cup contender that is going to go deep, deep into the playoffs. And this year's team was very much like that. They got off to that really hot start at the beginning of the year. I thought they blew me away the first like
Yeah.
month and a half of the season. I was like, whoa, where has this come from? But then after that Lake Tahoe game, they went through a stretch there for probably 5 6 weeks where it was not good. They were a 500 hockey team. And we really saw them drop down. There was even before the trade deadline, there was questions about whether this team was even going to make the playoffs or if the
Yep.
Rangers were going to catch them. And that there was a bad stretch there during the middle of the year. Then obviously the trade deadline happened. We get Taylor Hall, we get Mike Riley, we get Curtis Lazar, and this team, that was the wake-up call that they needed in the regular season, and this team just ripped it at the end of the year. Played absolutely outstanding. Obviously secured a playoff spot, moved to third in the division, and went into the postseason, and then obviously we know what happened in the playoffs. So nice first round win over Washington. Again, my confidence starts to build. I start to really
Yeah.
believe in this team after they handle Washington as easily as they did. And then they go into the Islanders series. They go up 1-0. I'm like, all right, here we go. This might be a team that can make a run. They go up 2-1 in the series. That's like, okay, like this team has a shot. Obviously, the injury to Brandon Carlo absolutely devastated this team's defense. They ended up losing 3 straight to the Islanders, lost the series in 6, and it's another broken heart season for the Boston Bruins and another year of Bergeron, Marchand, Krejci, Rask, this veteran core. Another year of those guys wasted, and the window is getting tighter and tighter and tighter each passing year where you're not going to have Patrice Bergeron at a high level for too much longer. You're not going to have David Krejci. Well, we don't know if they're going to have David Krejci at all for too much longer. He's a UFA this offseason. So same thing with Tuukka Rask. He's a UFA. We don't know what the future holds with him. Everyone has said, all of these pending free agents have said that they want to stay in Boston, but that's easy to say at a press conference. When you actually sit down at the table and start talking contract and trying to get something worked out, things can change quickly, especially if there's bigger money and a different opportunity out there on the open free agent market. Um,
Absolutely.
the this year was an important year for this team. I think next year is the year for. I think next year is it. Like if they don't do it next year, I think there's going to be a retool before they're a legit contender again. And I think the window with this veteran group is closing very, very quickly. And it was another disappointing finish to a fun year of hockey, and I found this team very likable. Um, I found myself really enjoying this year's team and enjoying watching them and enjoying a lot of the guys on the team and their personality and stuff. I found it to be a very likable Bruins team, but then at the end of the day, I still am sitting here disappointed with a second round playoff loss.
Yeah, I found this team very likable as well. Guys like Trent Frederick,
Yep.
Connor Clifton, Jeremy Swayman emerging. Uh, you really started to see some young guys play really hard and show that they wanted to be a Boston Bruin and that they were willing to give up their bodies and make great saves in order to get this team, some victories. And I think that to me, it was kind of the lunch pail mentality that this team had that really kind of made it my favorite team as well. And
Mm-hmm.
just to kind of circle back for a second, you talk about a retooling for the future with the way the Bruins have drafted over the last couple of years. That kind of scares me as well because they they need to do something to draft better because
Yeah.
that retool may take with the way they draft 2 decades, and I'm kind of exaggerating, obviously, but it feels like that sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Boston's draft record is very interesting to look at because they absolutely nail certain picks like McAvoy, Carlo, Pastrnak. Obviously, like
Yep.
there's certain picks that they absolutely nail, but then at the other side, like there's picks that are absolute flops, and there seems to really be no in between with the Bruins, where a lot of teams sometimes they get a decent player out of it, or they get somebody who maybe was drafted a little high, but at least is still a decent NHLer or can play lower in the lineup from where they were expected. Like with Boston, like the pick either is absolutely spot on or it's absolute junk and the guy's never going to do anything in the NHL. And like there's no in between with the Bruins. It's like their picks are so like one or the other. And it's really interesting to look at when you look at their draft history and how it's been going over the last few years. And that does, do I trust this management group to be able to kind of retool a team? I almost think they might try and do it more through trading or free agency than actual drafting because again the draft record you don't know what you're going to get. I mean, some of these picks are so bad, and
Yeah.
then some of these other picks have worked out really really well and they're spot on, and that's gonna you're obviously you have to draft well to build a decent team, and Boston does have draft picks playing significant roles in their lineup, like McAvoy and
Right.
Pastrnak, and Swayman coming up now looks like an incredible guy coming out of college. That I'm really excited for to see what he does long term. But at the same time, like if you're missing first round picks multiple years in a row, that is not going to help you build a team from the inside. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what this team is able to do because listen, Patrice Bergeron is not going to be around forever, and Brad Marchand is not going to be around forever. I mean, Bergeron at this point is 35 years old. David Krejci is 35 years old. Brad Marchand is 33 years old. Um, Tuukka Rask, we don't know if he's going to be back next year or not. If he does come back, he's going to be missing at least half the season to begin with because of the torn labrum that he played through in the playoffs. He's 34 years old. I mean, you've got key pieces that are aging significantly now for the Bruins, and without an influx of young guys to offset that, you're going to see a team on the decline very, very quickly. So they need to get some young talent in here. They need to get some good draft picks. They need to get some guys that are going to be able to take over as those guys get to the point where they're declining and eventually retiring out of the league. And there's not that much time left. There's not that much time left. And, you think about some of their more recent draft picks, we don't really know what they're going to look like. Studnicka is still, obviously, there's a lot of talent there, but he hasn't really found it at the NHL level to the point where he's a regular in the NHL lineup. Frederick's kind of the same way, where he looks like a fourth line guy right now, but is he ever going to be able to be more than that, or is he just destined to be a fourth line guy? John Beecher, we don't know. He played at Michigan last year, and he's still, I think, a ways away from an NHL impact. They have some recent draft picks that we just don't know yet, and then they have some guys that they drafted, that should be making a bigger impact than they have, and they haven't yet. And guys like, it's easy to harp on 2015, but Zach Senyshyn never been able to stick at the NHL level. I don't think he's ever going to. I've been saying that for years now, and some people like to still say give him a shot and let's give him some time, but I don't think he's ever going to be a regular in the NHL. Zaboral, I'm absolutely done with. This guy is useless. Jake DeBrusk had his worst season of his
Yeah.
NHL career this year, and I'm definitely going to be talking about him more later in this show. Um, but like, there's just is this management group going to be able to retool a team the way that they need to make them to have a quick turnaround and make them a contender, or are we in trouble? Are we in for some bad years as Bergeron, Marchand, Krejci, those guys start to age up and get older here?
I think we're in for some bad years, honestly, because I don't trust management enough to draft a team. I could see them trying to make some big moves,
Mm-hmm.
like, for instance, obviously we saw the Taylor Hall trade this year, but again, also their big moves, like Rick Nash a couple of years ago,
Yep.
that didn't work out necessarily the way that we thought it was going to. So I don't trust them to draft a team. I would be hesitant to trust them to be able to rebuild a team effectively at all. Because truthfully, I think Bergeron, Marchand, and Pasternak and Krejci and guys like that have been able to kind of fill the holes that with the mistakes that management has made. But they have to figure out somehow um, a way to draft better, and they have to figure out a way to develop their players better.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were saying, that 2015 draft, I thought Senyshyn was a reach when it happened, and
Yep.
I believe Matt Barzal was a part of that draft. Although I could be wrong, he could have
No,
been.
he went right after the Bruins picked.
That's right. Okay, so could you imagine Matt Barzal, who killed the Bruins last series? He would have been a lot better than than what
And
we got in
anyone.
2015. But it seems
Yep.
like the Bruins tend to go for reaches in the draft in hopes that they find a diamond in the rough, kind of like a Bill Belichick scenario, and see if it works out. The only problem is, unlike Bill Belichick, these picks really haven't worked.
Yeah.
So, I'll be interested to see what they do. They need to kind of refocus their efforts on, trying to develop players and not going for, under the radar guys and go for the safe pick. Whether or not that's a question of them not being able to, evaluate talent properly or something else is another story for another day. But this the Bruins are in trouble post Bergeron, Marchand, and Pasternak because I truthfully do not trust this management team to build a team properly.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, they have some really good pieces that are young. They have McAvoy, they have Pasternak, they have Swayman in goal, they've got Carlo on the back end. Like, they have some pieces there that they can build around, but 4 or 5 young pieces is not enough in itself. That's a good start, but
Right.
you've got to be able to build a team around those 4 to 5 young pieces. And I mean, they need somebody to be able to come up out of Providence or out of the college ranks or wherever to be able to start making an impact at the NHL level. Because how many of these guys are just not their their player development is not great compared to some other teams around the league where
Right.
these guys cannot come up and make an immediate impact. And I think next season is going to be huge for Jack Studnicka. This is a guy that I've loved for the past couple of years. I loved watching him in Providence. I had really high hopes for him to be a top 6 center in the NHL and be able to play a role like that and play a significant role like that. But he's 22 years old now, and he wasn't even a regular in the NHL last year. Like he's gonna be 23 next year. He has got to be in that NHL lineup on a regular basis. If he's not good enough for that, that's a problem. Um, I just there so many teams around the league have guys at 19, 20 years old making significant impacts in the NHL, coming up out of the minors or out of junior or out of college and making an immediate impact at a very young age. And Boston just doesn't seem to be able to find many of those guys. Carlo obviously did it. He came right in on the back end as what he was like 19
Yeah,
when he came up to Boston. I mean, Carlo was one that was able to do it, but there haven't been that many compared to other teams around the league. And I really think that there is a lack of young talent with this team, and I think that's why the depth scoring's been such an issue.
yeah,
Um, and I think that this team continues to be carried by that top line. As we saw in the playoffs, everyone went cold except for that top line, and eventually that top line is not going to be able to carry the team single-handedly anymore. And the Bruins are in big trouble when that happens because they have not had the level of young talent coming in from the 19, 20, 21-year olds that a lot of other teams around the league have.
correct. And to me, that is a scouting issue as well as we talk about Sweeney and Neely. I mean, they're part of this too. But to me, the scouting department I think needs to be looked at because it always seems, and I know I've talked with you about this, that they go for the American-born players and
Yep.
they stay in the country, and that's fine. I mean, there's a lot of good players in the United States, but I would love to see them try to get a Canadian-born player or somebody other than an American player to add to their pipeline because it seems like they go for the safe picks that they know. And luckily, McAvoy and Grizzlick were in our backyard, and those have worked out. But their draft strategy has not paid off, and you talk about other teams, being able to develop talent and have players playing right away. I think, with the Colorado Avalanche and Cale Makar, he was able to come in right after his national championship at UMass
Mm-hmm.
and make an immediate impact for the team. Now, obviously, he is an extremely talented player, but I haven't really seen a young player for the Bruins be able to just come in and make an impact like other teams have had.
Yeah, and doesn't it seem like Boston never takes the most talented player on the board? Like it seems like every time Boston's drafting, it's never the top ranked guy that they take. It's never the most talented guy. There's like something else to their draft strategy that um that ends up that they end up taking somebody, whether it's a college player or somebody from a local state, or like there's always something else, but it never seems like they're taking the most talented player on the board at that pick. And that is leaving a lot of misses
Yeah.
on the board there, or they're picking a lot of misses while they're leaving talent on the board, and then you're seeing them get scooped up by other teams, and they're able to come in and have a much bigger and sooner impact than what the Bruins are getting from their picks.
Too often I've heard analysts say following the Bruins pick, well, he's a nice player, but he's a bit of a reach.
Yeah.
And you see all these analysts pick, player X, and then the Bruins end up picking player Z. And look, I'm not saying that the analysts are right all the time, but some of these no-brainer picks that you would think the Bruins would pick, they end up going in a completely different direction. And to me, I don't know what their draft strategy is and what they look for in a particular player, but I feel like that needs to be reworked, especially with the team coming at a crossroads, I think, within the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole point of all this is we're just talking about, where Boston is at, and how quickly this window is closing after another second round loss and another year of this team not being able to get it done deep into the playoffs. And unfortunately, that's become a common occurrence here for this team where, they're a playoff team, but they're not good enough to be a Stanley Cup team. And we've seen that once again this year. And it's frustrating to say the least as this
Yeah.
window with the Bergeron group closes, and it gets tighter and tighter and tighter here, running out of time. And drafting is going to be vitally important to this team building for the future because a lot of these guys that they are relying heavily on now are not going to be here for too much longer, and you're going to have that next crop of guys come up and be able to make an impact and replace those players. And right now, I don't think Boston has the guys in their system that are going to be able to replace those players. So they're going to have to really hit it with some draft picks here. They're going to have to make some really good offseason moves to keep this team headed in the right direction and keep them in the playoffs. But getting back to more of a look back on this season, we've talked about, it's kind of what the same thing that's been happening, where they're a playoff team. They're pretty good in the regular season. You get your hopes up. They have stretches where they look really, really good, but at the end of the day, it's just not enough. And they're not good enough overall to be able to beat some of the other top teams in the league. And this year it was the Islanders that they lost to, and now the Islanders look like they're giving Tampa quite a run for their money. That New York team's very, very good. But looking at the Bruins and just kind of the overall year that they had, I want to talk about some players that had really good years and players that did not. So, looking at this roster, is there anybody that stood out to you that you were super impressed with this season? That you were almost maybe surprised at just how good they were?
Well, I will say that I was impressed with Mike Riley, and yes, he wasn't a player that the Bruins started off with at the beginning of
Mm-hmm.
the season, but I was impressed with the way he was able to play this year. I thought he did a good job of passing the puck. I thought he was a lot faster than I expected, and I really thought he was able to, um, kind of be that stabilizer defensively. Now, as far as players who are on the Bruins the entire season, McAvoy really kind of settled into his role as a top defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, we had questions last year as to if he could make that next jump, and he definitely did. I was very impressed with his play, and I was very impressed with how long he was able to stay on the ice and give the Bruins that solid play, especially with the departures of Chara and Krug. And then I was impressed with the younger goaltenders, Swayman and Dan Vladar. I
Mm-hmm.
thought they did a nice job. They were kind of not thrown into the fire, but they were put in some difficult situations. And although they didn't really, um, you know, they were put in difficult situations, but they didn't kind of, um, back away from the moment.
Yeah.
They were able to play solid hockey, and that was important to me because when you look at the goaltender position and just how old the veterans at the position are, you need
Yep.
to start developing for the future. And I thought that was a huge step.
Yeah, I agree. The young goaltending was very impressive. And Rask is 34. Halak's 36. You got to assume Halak is not going to be back next year after getting passed on the depth chart by Swayman the way that he has. I I was very impressed with, and it's a very good sign the young goaltending stepping up the way that it did because they're going to have to. I certainly think that whether Rask comes, Rask, we know next season is not going to be playing until probably at least February because of the injury. So even if Rask does come back next year, Boston's going to have to get another veteran goaltender to go along with whoever they're going to play. I don't think it's going to be Jaro Halak. He had a really down year this year. Um, he did not look great. I think they're going to go out and get somebody else. But to know that you have young goaltenders that can perform the way that Vladar did and the way that Swayman did is a really good sign for the future. And it's definitely something that's encouraging about this team. McAvoy to me was the standout as far as guys who had a great season, who I was super impressed with. Obviously, you can talk about anyone on the top line: Pastrnak, Bergeron, Marchand. Marchand had almost 70 points this year. He had an unreal season, but you almost expected at this point from that
Yeah.
line. You know what you're going to get from that line. That they're all going to be fantastic, and that they're going to be a big part of this team because they have to be because there isn't much else. Um,
Right.
but McAvoy was the guy that made that huge jump, and you mentioned it. We were questioning at the beginning of the year, is McAvoy going to be able to take that next step? We knew that he was a very good young defenseman, but was he an elite young defenseman? He proved this year that he's an elite defenseman. He is a Norris level player. He's a guy that is a true number one. He can play in all situations. He plays well at every area of the ice. A full 200-foot game. He can put points up. He had 30 points in the regular season. He had a bunch more in the playoffs. He plays really well defensively. He's a heavy plus player. He can be physical when he needs to be. Like, McAvoy does everything well, and I think this year was Charlie McAvoy's kind of coming out party where he proved that he is a legitimate number one stud D-man who is one of the better young defensemen in the NHL. And I was super impressed with him this season. And I think he's one of the most important pieces for the Boston Bruins going forward. And when you look at the Bruins in their group, um, he is on a bridge deal right now, making 4.9 million through next season. At the end of next season, he will be an RFA again. They better keep some cap space open because Charlie McAvoy is going to be making a lot more than 4.9 million on his next contract. I think you're going to be looking at a guy that is going to be up in the 7.5 million category with some of the
Oh
other
yeah.
absolute stud D-men around the league. Not quite sure he's going to get Victor Hedman money or anything like that, but you're looking at 7 to 7.5 million most likely on his next contract. So, um, especially if he has another season next year like he did this year, where he proves that it wasn't just one good season and that's the kind level of defenseman he is. If he's a Norris finalist, he is going to be getting a significant raise. So, um, McAvoy to me stood out as kind of the guy that I saw this year and was just blown away with, and really impressed to see him take that next step and prove that he is a legitimate top guy in the NHL.
Yeah, and I will add another player to this list. I thought Nick Ritchie played really well. I mean, he was a guy that I didn't expect much out of at all, but I he always seemed to at least give it his all and try to get pucks to the net. He had 26 points,
Hmm.
15 goals, 11 assists. So he didn't offer like a ton of offensive spark, but I thought he did. I thought he did play hard, and he gave a lot more than what I was initially expecting. And same thing with Craig Smith. He always seemed to shoot pucks at the net and
Hmm.
try to make a play and try to get to the dirty areas. So those two really kind of surprised me because I didn't really expect a ton out of them, but I thought they had really nice years and gave Boston, scoring pop and depth at certain times.
Yeah, Craig Smith was pretty much what I thought he was going to be. I've followed him for now throughout his career. I loved him in Nashville. I loved the Bruins signing him. He had a really good year as far as point production goes. Now, he didn't have as many goals as he was getting down in Nashville, where he was pretty much a 20 goal guy every year, but he had way more assists this year than what he normally had, and that ended up being one of his higher point total seasons with 32 in 54 games. So if you average that out over a 82 game season, Craig Smith would have had one of his highest point totals of his career this season. And while the goal scoring wasn't huge, the assists were absolutely way higher than what I was expecting. And Ritchie, I mean, my expectations for Nick Ritchie were so low heading into this season. I didn't even know if he was going to
Yeah,
be a regular in the lineup. And for him to come out and score 15 goals, I mean, I don't know how anyone can complain about that.
yeah,
Now, I don't think he was very good in the playoffs.
no,
I think his play really dropped off in the playoffs. He didn't really add much offensively, and he wasn't the physical guy in the postseason that I think the Bruins needed him to be. or that I wanted him to be. Um, but there's no doubt he had a very, very good regular season. I mean,
Yeah.
26 points and 15 goals from a guy that I didn't even think was going to be in the lineup. That's a really solid regular season from Richie. And, if they can get him back on a 1 year deal at low money, as a kind of a fourth line guy, I would not be opposed to bringing Richie back on a cheap contract if, he knows that it's going to be kind of in a fourth line role and that's what he's going to be. If you can get him down at like 1 million or 1.25, something like that, I wouldn't be opposed to bringing him back because I think he did have a nice regular season this year. But he surpassed expectations just because my expectations were so low heading
Yeah.
into this year, given how horrible he was for the Bruins after the trade last year in 2020.
Yeah, and sometimes it's best to have low expectations for these players so that
Mm-hmm.
if they perform really well, you get pleasantly surprised. And I thought Richie did a really nice job of kind of finding his role and just being aggressive and getting towards the net. So I'll be interested to see. He's one of the depth guys that I would like Boston to bring back, depending on the price and if he
Mm-hmm.
accepts the role. But if he can perform like he did. Um, this year, then I would have no problem with Boston bringing him back.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. As long as it's on a cheap contract and he knows that he's going to be in the bottom six, I wouldn't be opposed to it either. And if he has if it's only a 1 year deal, why not? I mean,
Yeah,
if he goes back to having another lousy year like he did in 2020, then you just let him go at the end of the season, and it's not a big deal. Um, I want to switch things to the other side now. Guys that had bad years. And
mm,
I definitely think that there are some here that come right to mind when I bring this up.
yep,
Wasn't all sunshine and roses for the Bruins this year. There were some guys that really had down seasons and really struggled. And I just want to get your take on who jumps out to you that was a big disappointment this season.
Jake DeBrusk.
Yep.
He played in 41 games, 14 points, 5 goals, 9 assists. We've talked about him on this show before. He needed to be a guy that offered depth scoring and could be reliable because we've seen stretches where he's been really, really good and he's been able to be a goal scorer and give the Bruins that depth.
Yep.
This season, he just did not have that same spark. And I don't know what it is because it's very frustrating. There's no doubt that he's athletically gifted. There's no doubt that he has good handles and he can get the puck in the net. It's just a question of if and when. And so I was really, really disappointed by him because I've always thought that he could be a player that could help the Bruins with their depth right now and be a key piece in the future. But after this season, I'm not really so sure. That was the one guy that really, really stood out to me.
DeBrusque was absolutely brutal this year, and it sucks because I've always liked Jake DeBrusque. He had a monster year in 2018-19. I thought he was going to break out and become, a 30-goal guy in the NHL. I thought he was going to be that winger that the Bruins needed outside of the top line that was going to be able to put up big numbers and add to the offense. And after 2019, he had a down year in 2020, and just absolutely fell off a cliff this
Yeah,
season. Only 5 goals this year for DeBrusque. That is absolutely brutal. Um, and this was a guy that I said going into this year that
yeah,
this was a huge year for Jake DeBrusque because he had just signed the bridge deal. He's making over 3.5 million. It was time for him to get back on track and show that he was going to become that perennial second line guy that could score 25 to 30 goals in a season. This was a huge year for DeBrusque going in, and he completely just failed it. I mean, if I were giving grades right now, DeBrusque gets a big fat F for this
yes,
season. He was absolutely awful. And I want him gone. I want him traded this offseason. If there is any value for him out there whatsoever, this guy has got to go. It is not going to happen here in Boston. I don't think he's just going to flip a switch and go back to scoring 28 27 goals or 28 goals or anything. Like I think that his time here is done. I don't think he's going to be the player that he was supposed to be. The past 2 years have been decline to big decline. Um, and I am done with Jake DeBrusk. I mean, he was absolutely atrocious this year, and he's what 25, 24 now. I mean,
Yeah,
listen, again, we talk about all these teams around the league who have guys producing heavily at 21, 22 years old, and we have 24-year-olds that don't even, turning 25, that don't even, really belong in the lineup, in my opinion. And
they're not even in the organization yet. In some cases, they're in Providence
yeah,
still.
I mean that we've got guys down in Providence that are taking so long to develop. They're 23, 24 before they even get a look in the NHL. And at that point, what are you really going to do? Like, this is what I mean. The lack of young, pure talent in the Boston organization is a big problem. And I thought DeBrusk was it. I loved this guy when he first got here. I thought he was going to be a legitimate top six scorer that could really put up some numbers, 30 goals, 60-point type guy. And the past 2 years, especially this year, I am done with Jake DeBrusk, and he was absolutely brutal. Another guy that I think was terrible this season was Charlie Coyle.
Yep, I was just gonna say him. Yeah,
Charlie Coyle was absolutely awful this year, and he still has 5 years left on his freaking contract. Over $5 million a year with 5 years left on his deal for a guy that had 16 points this year. Are you kidding me? 16
yeah,
points and did absolutely nothing in the playoffs. I mean, he had 3 points in the playoffs, as did DeBrusk. I mean, 3 points? Are you
yeah.
kidding me? And he only had 16 in the regular season in 51 games. I mean, it was an absolutely atrocious year for Coyle. He's under 50% in the faceoff dot. He's not a particularly good shutdown center. He's not going to play that role. It's funny. He had a really, really good year, when he came over from Minnesota.
Yeah.
Obviously went on the playoff run in 2019, and he looked good, and I was excited for the Bruins when they signed him to that contract because I thought he
Yep.
was going to be a really good middle six guy for this team. And after this year, I really hope that this was just a one-off awful season and that he's going to get back to at least being close to what he was when he first got here, because he was absolutely horrendous this season. And if he plays like this again, that contract is going to be dead. There's absolutely
Yep.
deadly for the Bruins because uh, in a flat cap world where this salary cap is not going up anytime soon, um, paying a guy to play on your third line and give you 16 points, over $5 million a year, is absolutely brutal.
He's also 29, so
Yeah,
he's in the later half of his 20s,
he's
and by
pushing
the
30,
yeah, and by the time the contract is up, he'll be
34.
34. So
Yep.
it's gonna this could have the potential to turn out very badly for Boston. I was very disappointed with him this year, and he's got to show me something next year, if only for the sake of trying to live up to the rest of his contract.
Yeah. I mean, I really hope this isn't David Backus 2.0,
Ugh.
but I mean, he's got to get back on track next season because I mean, this year was just absolutely horrible for him.
Yeah, and like you said, I was very excited when he initially came over. Local kid, could move the puck pretty well, but this year he was unable to put it together in a huge way, kind of like DeBrusk. He kind of disappeared, and we didn't really see much from him. And that continued into the playoffs too.
Hmm.
And it's just there's a lot of not solid production coming from some key players that we thought were going to make a big impact throughout the rest of their Bruin careers. We're talking
Yep.
about, getting rid of DeBrusk possibly. We're talking about 5 years on the Coyle deal. There's a lot of difficult situations that the Bruins have put themselves in that might hinder, a faster rebuild.
Yeah, absolutely. When you just when it comes down to it, they are not getting enough point production out of guys like DeBrusque and Coyle. And that's depth scoring is one of the biggest, most major issues with this team. And there's two guys you can point to right there as to why.
Yep.
Just not enough production. And when you look at other teams around the league who are able to get that production, I mean, look at the team that we just lost to in the playoffs with the Islanders. Not only do they have Barzal and Eberle on their top line, but the Brock Nelson line with Bailey and Bavillier on the
Yep.
second line. And then not only that, but they have Palmieri and Pajot on the third line. They had three lines scoring at basically a first line level in that series. And their fourth line, while they didn't add a whole lot offensively, is
They were
one of the
physical.
best fourth lines physically in the NHL, and we're a dominating force physically. So, I mean, you look at these other teams and these teams that are successful in going deep into the playoffs and look at what they have that the Bruins don't. That balanced attack and that balanced scoring is one of the biggest differences. The Tampa Bay Lightning, they've got four lines that can score. At least three, at least three that are scoring on a regular basis. And the same thing in Vegas. I mean, Vegas now the offense against Montreal is getting shut down a little bit. They've actually got more goals from defensemen than anyone else. But Vegas, I mean, they've got, obviously Pacioretty and Stone that can score. They've got Riley Smith. They've got Jonathan Marchessault, who's had a really good postseason. Then down on the third line, they've got Alex Tuck. I mean, he's had a great playoffs. And then they get offense from the back end as well, which outside of McAvoy, Boston's severely lacking in that category. They don't get enough scoring from their defensemen. They don't get enough
Yeah.
offensive output from their D-men, with the exception of McAvoy. And Mike Riley came in and helped with that a little bit. He obviously is able to move the puck. He's a good assist man, but they need more from that point where, you look at Matt Grzelcyk, he had 20 points, which is not bad, especially given that it was in 37 games. But Matt Grzelcyk needs to stay healthy. He had a
Yes.
lot of injury issues this
Yes.
year, and he can provide offense from the back end when he is healthy, but he has got to be in the lineup or else Boston does not get nearly enough offense from their D-men when he's gone. And that, I think, is where they miss Torrey Krug.
Yeah, and when you look at structures of these playoff teams, they have depth scoring, they
Yep,
have solid defensemen, and they have players who aren't afraid to get to the net and tip the puck in.
yep,
And to me, the Islanders are a good example of what the Bruins should be modeling their team after. I'm not saying they can, and I'm not saying I know there's cap issues and this and that and whatever, but having depth scoring plus a physical line, which is not something the Bruins have had in the past couple of years,
mm-hmm,
is what needs to be kind of the blueprint moving forward. Because the depth that I saw um, in the series against the Islanders was very impressive. You had guys like you said, Palmieri. He was scoring goals and he was giving the top guys a chance to rest and also
mm-hmm.
produce. Whereas the Bruins, they, like you said, rely heavily on Marchand, Pasternak, and Bergeron, and the Bruins need that depth because that's what all these remaining playoff teams have. They have a solid structure of guys who know their roles, who are NHL players, NHL caliber players, and who can, play with energy and physicality each shift. They're not reliant on one line, and that's what's going to, give these teams a chance to win it all. The Bruins do not have,
Yep.
any of those things, and that's what's making them fall short.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about this during one of my streams last week, that all of the teams that rely heavily on one or two singular star players to carry the load out of the playoffs early. All of the teams that rely heavily on one line to carry the team out of the playoffs early. And all the teams that are able to make it deep, all the teams that can make it to the semifinals or the finals, they're doing it with depth. They're doing it with grade A goaltending. You got to be getting great goaltending to win in the playoffs. They're doing it with big physical defenses, like all four teams remaining have, and they have scoring depth where they have at least three lines that can put the puck in the net. And when you look at the Bruins, look what happened against the Islanders. That second line went completely cold.
Yep.
That third line brought nothing to the table. Fourth line didn't bring anything offensively all
Yep.
season. That was a huge issue for this team. They got nothing out of their fourth line all year. They were, with the exception of the top line, Marchand, Bergeron, Pastrnak, they weren't getting offense from anybody else in that Islanders series. And that ended up being one of the main downfalls of this team. And once again, they're a one-line team that is way too reliant on those top guys, and they don't have the depth that other teams around the league do.
One of the things that kind of really bothered me, and this is kind of separate from what we were just talking about, but I was just thinking they had trouble clearing the puck out of their own zone
Yep.
in that Islanders series, and it's been a problem throughout the entire season. They either miss the puck at the blue line, they forget the puck, they don't clear properly. The fundamentals that they were lacking got really exposed in the Islanders series because it seemed like at times there were very long stretches where the Islanders were able to keep the puck in the Bruins zone, and it's all well and good that the Bruins outshot them in a lot of the games, but the
Mm-hmm.
Islanders were able to execute their fundamentals and get the job done when it mattered most. And that was something I thought Washington didn't do, that the Bruins did better in the opening round.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time Boston, got to the second round with the Islanders, the Islanders were just patient, waited for the Bruins to make a mistake by not clearing the puck or not, shooting or passing too much on the power play, and they just said, okay, we're going to take advantage of this and try to score goals and timely goals, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. The defense did not perform in the Islanders series. Once Carlo went down with that injury, even having Kevin Miller out really, really hurt this team. They got too far down into their depth guys, playing too big of minutes, and they weren't able to step up to the plate. Lausanne was horrible in the Islanders series. Tenorti, I mean, I don't mind Jared Tenorti. I like the physicality that he brings. I think he can be, an okay stay-at-home guy, but you don't want him playing 16, 17 minutes a night. You don't want Jared Tenorti to be anything higher than a 1 or 2 game fill-in when somebody goes down. Connor Clifton, even to me, is a number 7. He's not a guy you want in your lineup on a nightly basis, and you certainly don't want him playing top 4 minutes. And that's
Right.
what he had to do with these guys out of the lineup. And I thought Clifton, the last 2 to 3 games of the Islanders series were some of the worst games I've seen Connor Clifton play. He was just completely overwhelmed, overmatched, out of his element, and could not make a play defensively. And I just they got down into the depth guys that were not ready to be playing those big important minutes in a playoff series. And again, I don't think they have the depth on the anywhere that is going to be good enough when somebody does get injured, like a Brandon Carlo, to make up for it. Again, it seems like with these past few years, these versions of the Bruins teams, they need, when their regular lineup is healthy, they could be a team that could go to the Stanley Cup. But everything has to go perfect for them to have a chance. As soon as something goes wrong, as soon as a big piece falls out of the lineup or somebody gets injured or something happens where someone's playing hurt, or as soon as anything goes wrong, they don't have the depth to make up for it, and they're just done. And if it doesn't go perfectly, they're not going to be able to go deep in the playoffs. And newsflash, it's the NHL. Nobody's healthy all the way through the playoffs. That's not how it works. The game is too hard. It's too physical. Somebody is going to get hurt, and you're going to be down guys, and they don't have the depth to make up for it.
No, and that's what makes it so frustrating. It's like this nice machine during the regular season, but as soon as, a penny gets stuck in the machine and the
Yep.
gears stop working, then everything completely falls apart. And it's frustrating to watch because
Yep.
it's going to happen. We've played this game before. and it's just like watching, a train wreck. And it shouldn't take, like you said, one player to, kind of derail this whole thing, but that's where the depth comes in. And in that respect, again, do I trust this management group to be able to build a team? It's not just about getting good players, but also getting about the players who can contribute,
Yep.
in a lesser role. And to me, I don't know. I don't think so, but that's another conversation that we can have another day.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about early in the show with the drafting and the drafting just not being good enough. They don't have the young players that they can pull up into the lineup and replace someone when they do get injured. And they don't have enough of them. Not every Bruins draft pick is bad. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Some of their draft picks, like I said, have been absolute home runs, like McAvoy, like Carlo, like Pasternak, like some of these young guys that have come in and made big impacts. But too many picks have been complete flops to where they can't even contribute at all. And
correct.
that has really hurt the depth of this team because they don't have the guys that they can pull up in the same way that other teams around the league do. And it ultimately has led to a depth problem with this team that is now becoming more and more apparent every year in the playoffs.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what they do down the road, but depth is a huge issue. And again, like we talked about earlier, when you give a guy like Charlie Coyle a 5-year contract, that kind of, hamstrings the team a little bit, just in the sense of you're paying a lot of money. Well, I shouldn't say like a ton of money, but a fair amount of money
Oh,
for a player who's kind of regressed a little bit, and yet he still has 5 more years on the deal. With this Bruins management and this Bruins organization, in so many ways, it's either the home run or the strikeout, to borrow a baseball analogy, and that's a tough way to run an organization.
absolutely. I mean, you look at the Coyle contract. I mean, you're paying your third line center 5.25 million per year. And then you look at the Islanders who are paying their third line center JG Pageau 5 million a year, which, pretty comparable contracts.
Yeah,
Would you rather have JG Pageau or Charlie Coyle? Cuz for me, it's like
JG.
they're not even on the same planet. It's JG
Yeah,
Pageau up here and Charlie
yeah,
Coyle down here.
yep.
Yeah.
And it's just so frustrating because we've seen a team like the Islanders kind of build their way and work their way up to be, a team that can compete right now and in the future. And the Bruins have been stuck in this position for the past, let's see, 7 years, uh, 5 years, a long time.
Five, I would say around five, because the last time they didn't make the playoffs was what, 2016? Yeah, they missed in 15 and 16. So I think coming out of those 2 years where they missed the playoffs from 2017 on, it's been pretty much the same thing with this team.
Not to mention that this week was the 10th anniversary of the 2011 Stanley Cup win.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was watching film and looking at like how young all of the now almost way too old to play hockey veteran players were, it
Yep.
just hurts. It hurts. Like
Oh yeah.
this hurts so bad. And I guess it's the territory of being a Bruins fan, but stop hurting me, Bruins, please, please.
Yeah. All right, one last thing to finish up here. We got obviously the off season coming up. What would your off season plan for the Bruins be, or just if you had like one big priority, what would it be for this team?
Re-sign Taylor Hall because we need depth scoring. He's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be the be-all, end-all, but I really like the way he played in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
He disappeared a little bit in the Islanders series,
Yeah,
but
he did.
he was a good line
So
mate
did
with.
everyone else though,
Yeah,
except for the top line.
yeah, he was a good line mate with Krejci. Whether Krejci will be back, we don't know. But he did offer the Bruins some speed, which they have been lacking in past years. And then I really want to see what they do with Rask. I think everybody on the show knows my stance on Rask, but um, I would like the Bruins to go with the younger goaltenders and see if they can allocate the Rask money somewhere else. But these are big decisions, so it's going to be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, I definitely think that Hall needs to come back. David Krejci, I think at this point, very clearly going to be taking a pay cut. He's not going to be making $7 million again, so that's going to give you some more money to work with. I would love to see Krejci back on a 1 or 2 year deal. I'd love to see Hall on a 1 or 2 year deal. I
Yeah.
think those two played very well together. I think Craig Smith is great on the right side there and playing with them. Um, I would love to see a full season of Hall and Krejci and Smith together.
Yep.
And I think that that is very doable this offseason on a shorter term deal for both of those guys. I'd like to see the fourth line reworked. Wagner, I think, stunk this year, brought nothing to the table. Corrali was horrendous. Luckily,
He
he's a
was.
UFA, and I don't think he's going to be back. I want to see Trent Frederick on that fourth line full time next season. Um, I don't care if he doesn't bring a lot offensively. I mean, he had 4 goals this year. It's not like he's incapable of chipping in offensively. I think if you can get over an 82 game season, if you can get 6 to 8 goals from Frederick and, 15 points, I'm good with that. I want his physicality on the fourth line.
Yep.
I want him on a full time NHL role next year on that fourth line. I want Lazar's signed, so he will be back. I want Lazar centering the fourth line. I want another guy other than Wagner on the right side. I get me somebody who's going to be big, somebody who's physical, and somebody who's a veteran. I think they need a veteran guy who's hungry, who maybe has been playing on a lousy team for a lot of his career and is going to really be excited to get a chance to be on a playoff level team,
Yeah.
and somebody who can play the right wing on the fourth line, and bring some physicality, because the Bruins have not gotten enough physicality out of their fourth line guys over the past few years, and they're being beaten by teams that are more physical than
Yeah.
them. Going all
Yeah.
the way back, Blues in 2019, more physical than the Bruins. 2020, Tampa Bay, more physical than the Bruins. 2021, Islanders, more physical than the Bruins. They have got to toughen up in the bottom parts of their lineup, and that should, I think, something that they need to do this offseason. But I think the biggest priority, I want to see Hall and Krejci back, and I want to see a full year of them together on some short-term team-friendly contracts.
Yeah, and when you talk about the lack of physicality on the fourth line for the Bruins, that's what a fourth line is for. They're
Yep,
for gritty, nasty, tough players, and the fact that the Bruins fourth line kind of went missing, through huge stretches this
yep.
season is a huge issue. But I'm interested to see what they do. This is going to be a big year for not only the Bruins, but for Don Sweeney and Cam Neely. These next 2 seasons, I'll say, will really put what they do in the spotlight, because now they're going to have to make some tricky decisions, and they won't be able to hide behind some potential mistakes they make. These are going to be key years for them to really try to get this thing right. If they do, they'll come out they'll come out smelling like roses. If they don't, it's going to reflect very, very poorly on them.
Absolutely, the clock is ticking with this team, with this group, and possibly with this management group. If this team falls off a cliff, or if they're not able to really make another deep run with this core, you eventually are gonna see major changes happen with this management group, and
Yeah.
Boston's gonna probably have to kind of go through a tough stretch to kind of start over. But we'll see what happens here this coming off season. Bruins have a lot of work to do because this team is not on the same level as a lot of the other teams around the league right now. And while they're certainly still a good team, a playoff team, they've got to improve in a few areas significantly if they're going to become a legitimate Stanley Cup threat.
Yep.
That's going to bring us now to the end of episode 25, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. Danny, it was a pleasure, as always, to have you on, man. Great talking hockey with you, and we'll definitely be doing this again.
Absolutely. I can't wait for the next one. It's always a blast. So I'm excited.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you guys again all for watching. I want to give a huge shout out to Mark Allred and the entire team at B&G Productions. This show is in partnership with B&G and would not be happening without them, so a big thank you to them for in all of their support. Also, one last mention of the links down in the description of the video. NHL gear, Boston Bruins gear, NCAA college gear. It's all there. Really helps out a lot if you could check those out. And if you're in the market for any of that, they've got a wide variety of products to choose from and high quality products as well. But that is going to bring us here to the end of episode 25. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back with more Bruins stuff to talk about next week, and going to obviously try and have a guest on again and see what kind of fun we can have next Friday. But for now, that's going to do it. Hope you guys have a great week. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll be talking to you soon.